All right, gentlemen. It's good to see you all.
Good to see ya.
I have to say, one thing, if you're not aware of this, we did launch a Facebook group called the Chairmen of the Boards, believe it or not. And we've already had hundreds of people join up. There isn't any weird questions that you have to answer like you do on some groups where you have to name 3 things that are related to a certain topic in order to even be considered for entry. There's none of that stuff. That may change though if we end up getting weirdos.
Just your social security number.
Yeah. For now, all you need to do is give us your PIN and social security and you're in. No, in seriousness, it's been really great. There's been a lot of people that have firstly been posting pictures of their work that have kind of gone along the lines of stuff that we talk about in terms of best practices and things like that. And there are some people that build rigs that resemble anything that I can do for sure. And it's also been a really great resource for troubleshooting, because a lot of people are saying, hey, I've got a quad cortex, I'm using the crux, I'm having this problem where it's not powering up properly. Or there was somebody who's like, hey, whenever I get my guitar next to my laptop, it's creating this sound, like what's the deal? And so we're able to kind of help with some of these questions. And it's a really great place to ask that. And ordinarily there's kind of like not really an outlet from a trusted source where you can like go and just ask that question. And it's all free. It's just like a great place to kind of hang out, a cool community. So I highly recommend that you check it out. We're going to have that listed in the description on YouTube, and I'll post it to the show notes as well, whether you're listening to it, if you're not watching us on the Chairman of the Boards YouTube. We also have an Instagram, Chairman of the Boards podcast Instagram, where we will be posting updates as well. So please do be sure to subscribe, follow, whatever the things are that you need to do. Join us. It's a good place to continue the conversation. But with that said, I want to talk about a really cool video that I saw, a channel that was formerly called Living Room Guitar Demos or Living Room Gear Demos.
Pedalboard
and then
demos?
It kind of changed.
Something like that.
Then it changed to like Living Room GD. I think it was Gear Demos, Living Room Gear Demos. And now it's just his name, which is, I think is Eric is his first name. I don't remember his last name. It's something that's...
He's Scandinavian.
He's Scandinavian. Yeah. Scandinavian.
Road range.
But has like the very like distinguished Scandinavian accent where you can totally understand him perfectly. And he's very eloquent and really knowledgeable, I think, on guitar tone and gets some amazing sounds. His work is very beautifully shot. And I think if you haven't checked out or heard of his channel, I think you're going to enjoy a lot of the stuff that he has to say. But he made this video that came across my feed thanks to the algorithm.
Thank you, algorithm.
Thank you, algorithm.
Yep, algorithm. Yeah. And I thought it was really interesting. He had this perspective about guitar pedals, and I think the question that he asks as sort of the thesis of his video is, are guitar pedals dying? And he gives sort of a list of examples and kind of theorizes as to why this might be true. And he kind of starts with the meteoric rise of guitar pedal sales during the pandemic. And then sort of talks about how there's been this sort of slow deterioration. He talks about a lack of interest in these sorts of effects, the rise of modeling in various types of digital style amplifiers, and goes into several other topics. And we've all watched this. It's a great watch. I will put it in the description and in the show notes if people want to check it out. It's not very long, maybe 12 minutes or something like that. So not too demanding of your time. But I think it's an interesting topic for discussion about sort of the future prognosis for guitar pedals. And I think it's interesting as a manufacturer of guitar pedals and accessories that are sort of related. And I'm curious, as people that are also making products or in the business of building systems that involve these sorts of products, what your opinion was about the video sort of generally, and then maybe we can get into some of the subcategories within that. So Any sort of initial sort of general kind of reactions to some of the things that Eric mentioned in his video?
Yeah. You want to go, Grant?
Yeah, I mean, I was appalled, flabbergasted, offended. I couldn't actually believe what I was hearing, if I'm going to be completely honest. Was that clickbaity enough? I think that was pretty good.
We can use it.
Can't believe he said these three things. No, I think he actually brought up some really good points, and I don't agree with all of them. I'll say that, and we'll get there. But I love his perspective. I love the question. But I do think that I feel like I'm on a merry-go-round in a sense, because I feel like every 5 years or so, the guitar is dying. Like, people aren't interested in guitar anymore. And then it's like, oh, no, sorry, they are. And then it kind of drops off, and then they're back again. And so I feel like, to a degree, this is another possible circle around, in that kind of realm again. But I love his questions. He kind of goes through the industry as it currently is in the video, and maybe we'll watch sections of it, I'm not sure, but how I feel like we are in a current swinging of the pendulum from what we did experience in the pandemic. And like one quick example that comes to mind for me, the pandemic hits. We're all in this unknown of, I can't work. What am I going to do? I have to keep my job going. And so for me in Goodwood, it was like, I need to start doing YouTube videos. That's what I can do from home. Like, that's something proactive I can start doing to keep my business moving forward. And I know I'm not the only one that really started putting a focus on content. And so now we have this influx of content, even more so than we did before the pandemic, because that's what people can do relatively easily. And now I feel like, to a degree, and he mentions this to one extent or another, we're kind of sick of all the videos now, and we're sick of all the gear demos and all of people's take. And there's a lack of trust in YouTube demoers that are trying to sell a product or being paid to sell a product. And I feel like it's a bit of a reaction, in part, to that. And I don't want to say everything all at once, but I feel like it's a great conversation. I love what he's saying. I don't think that guitar is forever dying, and we're in the middle of seeing that. I think it's a market reaction to what we have just come out of in the last couple of years, personally. And I will be the first to admit, last year, tail end of 2023, absolutely was feeling the downturn. And it's a little scary as a business owner. Like, what's this mean for me? Is this going to be long lasting? And it was a bit for me, more so than I've ever experienced. But then things kind of slowly start to come back again. And so, I'll throw it to you, Brian. But I think it's temporary. I think and hope. I hope it's temporary. And I think we're starting to see things slowly shift again at the beginning of this year.
Yeah. I think a lot of the points he made were good, valid points. I saw he talked about tariffs, and he talked about guitar stores. Like, he talked about all sorts of different factors. And, coming from working at a guitar store, seeing, I just think a lot of times people just kind of get into that, the busyness of life too. So it's convenient just to order stuff online, or how, just different ways that the stores are having to compensate. And plus, I mean, you mentioned COVID, like, you're as a business person, you're cooped up in your shop for that long. Like, I think we're kind of at the tail end of a lot of these companies that are pushing out. That's why you're seeing so many companies that are releasing a lot of pedals at the same time, or a bunch of pedals. And a lot of times they end up being kind of around the same thing as all of these COVID ideas that you can finally execute or get done or whatever and push out. So I think there are a few things that he said I didn't agree with, but some of them, like, it made sense. It's just, it's, I think for the video, which it was a cool aspect to get the idea from someone else of, like, or their perspective of, like, of the industry, because, the market is oversaturated in a lot of aspects. So that's what I think.
Yeah, so let's unpack some of the things that he said, and then maybe we can sort of, autopsy it a little bit for the purposes of the listener. So one thing that he starts off by saying is that the sales of pedals are not good. And I think that it is true in in the context of you had this boom, this disproportional number of people that were buying guitar-based equipment, not just pedals, but guitars as well. If you can remember, not too long ago, there was something that was released by Fender, like a statement released by Fender, and it got picked up by, all the major guitar publications, in essence, saying that they overproduced too many guitar models. They had over corrected for what they thought that the sales were going to be based on the pandemic, and they had so many instruments and not enough dealers to buy them. And in essence, like, we're sort of like liquidating products. Sounds like somebody's shaving their face in the background.
Yeah, I'm also hearing that.
Oh, sorry, my heater turned on.
I
was like I have my isolated stuff on, so I couldn't hear it. Sorry about that.
Just a under the table manscaping that was happening.
Brian's side hustle.
No,
he does Brazilians. If you're curious.
No, I have this little
and
floor
Manzilians.
just a floor heater. Sorry about that.
Hashtag not sponsored by Manscaped,
nope.
But open to it. So getting back to this video, so I think that Fender had made this this announcement, and people were like, oh, the prices of Fenders are going to be in the toilet forever, and nobody's buying guitars anymore, and like, here we are, whatever, a year and a half or 2 years away from whenever that happened. And from anything I can tell, the Fender's kind of like back on track. But I think that it is true that there was an overproduction. There was a lot of new companies that came on board. There were companies that experienced a lot of growth during that time, and then had to kind of correct for their volume because the demand subsided as inflation occurred, as people started to kind of settle into what the new normal was after the pandemic subsided. And so you're not seeing that same volume of sales. But I think it's in comparison to what? If we're looking at pre-2020 guitar pedal sales, I think what you're seeing is, again, something that's starting to resemble closer to that, but not at all what you were seeing in the beginnings of the pandemic. And so I think that this was an expected, or at least to my mind, an expected reaction, that like it couldn't stay at that rate forever.
Mm-hmm. As nice as it was.
And as nice as it was, it could not stay there forever. And I think one thing that he mentioned about the sales, and I think it's somewhat anecdotal, right? He doesn't go and say, well, here's the profit and loss from Sweetwater on their pedal sales or anything like that. I think he's kind of using other manufacturers' sort of anecdotal stories about what it is that occurred. And the reality is that, and I'm saying this as a manufacturer, the brands that are really good, and he even says this to a degree, really good at social media, maybe felt less of the effect of that, because their ability to be able to sustain their growth and capture an audience is more effective if you have good quality social media and you have a good size audience. For smaller companies that maybe experienced really dramatic growth but didn't have those other aspects in order, they probably have a much more difficult time trying to recreate or even have semblance of those sorts of sales, because I think that there, as he says in the video, the market is so saturated. And I think the pandemic really did that.
Yeah.
That there are so many choices. There's a lot of availability on the used market. And I think that also prevents people from buying new products when there are hundreds of the same product that exist on Reverb for 30 to 50% of the new price, which is again a consequence of there being a huge volume of sales. It's very difficult to recreate that. And I think companies that have been successful in sort of combating that particular mentality is like, I notice, JHS still, of course, offers this huge product line. But my prediction is that they probably manufacture most of those models in really small batches. And really what they're doing is focusing on the newest stuff and really building their volume around the things that are new and hot.
Yeah.
And even selling some things direct, like the Nauticlon. And I think that those sorts of things sort of make you much more immune to these sorts of economic swings, these sorts of attitudes that change amongst the buyers, because you're a little bit more in control of your own destiny. And again, like how he has a really big social media following, he has a way to reach people, let them know what's going on, talk to them about what's new, that smaller companies, they just don't have that. Or if they do have a social media presence, a lot of that information just isn't getting out there in the same way. Yeah. And so I think that in that sense, sure, I think companies that are kind of mid-sized to smaller are probably struggling in this environment where they're competing for dollars against much larger companies with much more extensive voices. But what are your guys' thoughts on kind of what he said about the saturation of the pedal market, and just not being able to cut through, and kind of maybe some of the consequences thereof?
I mean, I think just like everyone, like if you're running a company or you want to get whatever you want to say out to a large number of people, these days, the question is always, how do I actually get heard? Like, how do I reach more people more easily for less money? And I mean, in our particular industry, this is the only one I can speak to because I don't know any others. It's a very valid question. And ironically, oftentimes you have to not talk about the thing you're trying to sell. Like if you come across as trying to sell something, you are not going to get the views as if you were trying to come across and give people an interesting thing to consider, or, which is, I mean, we're all very aware of this to one degree or another, but the videos that do best for me are the ones are like 3 tips for setting up your pedal board. It is not the interfacer is a product you should try on your pedal board for these reasons. It's the stuff that helps a greater, the general public. But I think JHS does this brilliantly. The amount of videos they put out that are not about their products or about other companies' products or comparing whatever it is, these delays from it's awesome what they do in that regard. And they do very well because of it. And therefore, their products also sell better when they, in one degree, talk less about their own products. They do a better job. And so the amount of noise that comes through is obviously larger than it's ever been. Everyone has an Instagram channel. Everyone has a little studio in their pocket on their phone, and they can create content and add to the noise. Mm-hmm. What he did say, which I agree, I see why he said it, and I agree, and I also disagree, is he's saying the people with the best marketing team win, and if you can't market, you can't do a great job in the industry, and I might be a little unfair in how I word that. And I would agree, but I think there are also many outliers, people that do not have Instagram. The first one that comes to mind is Kingsley. And Kingsley, he's not on Instagram. He doesn't really do any marketing, but the word of mouth for a great product, like a truly great product, it sells itself. Yep. But there are not that many truly great products out there that people are going to do the marketing for you. And I mean, even like Analog Man, I mean, he's on Instagram, but I wouldn't say he's a great Instagrammer. Klon is the same, Klon LLC. Yeah. The posts they put out would have been doing okay in 2004, but they aren't anything now. Like, there's no production value to them, but the wait lists are ridiculous. And so you do not have to be a great marketer, but I think it would be your best shot at cutting through the noise rather than I have this product that everyone's talking about. That's harder to do than to learn how to do marketing well, in my opinion.
Can I interject on that real quick? Because I think that one of the things that Kingsley has working for them is that one of the most prominent mouthpieces in the guitar pedal world, being that pedal show, are real champions of his brand. I think if he didn't have that sort of those sorts of voices supporting him, I think it would be a much different trajectory. I know that even preceding what, or in terms of like what their level of awareness was, or people's awareness of Kingsley, even before that pedal show really took root and was like a phenomenon in our industry. Certainly, I knew people that used and loved those effects, you know, because of the tubes and those sorts of things. However, I think that there would be limitations as far as like the longevity on that alone. Like, I think some of it, there is some luck involved in having Mick or Dan talk about your product, use it on their pedal board, and sort of be in a recurring rotation. I think that is a huge help, and part of the reason why he hasn't had to pivot into like that social media arena. I think it would be a different outlook if that wasn't present. And I think that Analog Man is an interesting case, and I think that you bring up some good counterpoints with that. I feel like he's sort of transcended a lot of this because he kind of has one of the devices that has kind of become part of the language of pedals. The King of Tone has become just an iconic piece, a legendary piece of gear, which is just sort of inescapable from the pedal conversation. And he's got a few of them that are kind of like that. I think King of Tone is one. I think the other one being like the sun face in the world of the fuzzes is kind of like another one that has sort of transcended what it is and has kind of become its own thing. And so I think that those are sort of the standards for which a lot of overdrive pedals are measured against. And I think the Klon equally is the same. I think they came up with something that has become kind of the high watermark in its category. And it is a device with which everything else is compared to. And so I think that those guys I think that those are interesting cases that I think probably don't represent, though, the majority of these smaller brands. Like, I think that those are like standouts, of course. But if you took sort of like a mid-level or you know, some company that is not like a Dunlop or a JHS or, you know, something like that, I think what he's saying is otherwise true. Like, I agree that, to your point, the things you mentioned, absolutely, those guys have sort of like reached this level of status where they've been able to sort of transcend having to do those exercises that most people would have to do to promote their products. But I think that they're like very much the exception.
100%. And they did it at like, if, let's say the Klon never existed and it was now released in 2023, 2024.
Yeah.
It would
dead
be
in the water.
Totally lost. It would not be a thing.
And so in the 90s, Analog Man.
Yeah.
Analog Man couldn't exist if starting now.
Yeah.
It would be very hard.
At least not in the way that it came about organically as it did. It would be a huge, huge effort. But even then, I mean, name an overdrive pedal that's been released in the last 2 years that has the same status or similar status. They just don't exist. They come and they go.
Like what would be something that was released even in the last 10 years that you think is on the level of a Klon or a King of Tone? Like, I'm trying to think of like what would be something in the last 10
obviously
years.
A Vertex Boost.
Obviously.
Well, I think Strymon, like with, I know this was more than 10 years ago now, but something like the Timeline was an industry-changing pedal.
Yeah.
Even though it wasn't the first of its kind. It was not the first multi-delay. It was not the first thing with MIDI. But for some reason, that came out and the industry has now shifted and they've, you know, set a benchmark. But
here's the interesting contrast, though, that I think about Strymon. Like, I agree with you in their brand, but as soon as there's a Timeline MX that comes out, nobody is going to be going after Timelines.
Yeah.
Just the version 1.
Yeah.
Whereas like the Klon and the King of Tone are like there's no upgrade to that that's going to be more value. Like the KTR doesn't outsell the Klon.
Yep.
You know, whereas I think in Strymon, in that world, whatever is the version 2 or whatever is the latest revision is always going to be the most popular. But I'm trying to think of like, is there something like a specific device which is just like now just part of like the lexicon of guitar pedals? And I'm struggling to think like of what that would be. I mean, I'm kind of like looking down here. Is there something that I'm really missing?
When did the Timmy come out? I know that wouldn't be it, but that would be getting into that realm.
I would actually argue that would be in that category.
That might have been late, like what, 2007?
Well, I mean, you know, don't you know, like let's stretch it to 15 years. I think Timmy is definitely probably in that conversation. There's been a lot of devices that have been based on that,
but still probably pre-market saturation as we experience it now.
What about?
But he's kind of like what you said, where he doesn't really advertise on Instagram. I mean, he'll post on Facebook like, "Hey, there's a new batch heading to Humbucker Music" or something like that. But it's like it's not done in a traditional way. Yeah. Sorry, Brian. You said.
What about like Kingtown? Any of that? They're kind of like the Duelist. I mean, I know that's another type, one of those 2-in-1. But I don't think it's in a comparison.
They have a loyal following.
I don't think it's on that level at this point in time. Yeah, it may become that, but I think that it's a long way away from Timmy or King of Tone.
Well, didn't it in Timmy? Didn't they do like they did the Tim, right? The bigger one.
Yep. I remember
there's the Tim, and then there's the MXR version, which is a mini version, right? Compact version.
Well, and the question has to be asked as well is in the realm of pedals as they are now, where we are headed more and more, almost entirely into digital platforms. Mm-hmm. Is it possible to even create a pedal that is software based? Like let's just say even the Timeline, like you can't run it without DSP. I don't know if you can create a pedal like the Klon on a digital platform, because it will always be upgraded, superseded, updated, and that new version will be better. Yeah. Unless some
nobody's saying like, "Hey, I need the version 1 of this plugin.
I want the older software, please."
Better. Yeah. They don't. I never hear that.
And so, are we gonna see pedals like this ever again? I don't know if we will. I'm sure there will be an outlier here or there. But we have the Klon, we have the King of Tone, we have the old rack gear, we have the, all this stuff, even Eventide. I don't know if that will exist anymore, and this is one of his other points in the video, which again, I don't know if I agree in part, but he said guitarists are going for a vintage sound. We're always, and I know Mason, you probably live more in this camp than either me or Brian combined, but we're trying to recreate the sound of the 60s, or we're trying to, and even the modeled gear is this 60s Vox. Now you have it in a digital platform. And I agree and I disagree, but, I think with that being the case, if we're looking towards vintage gear, then the vintage gear will always be held as the benchmark that we are trying to achieve, which is analog, not digital. And so therefore the analog gear becomes the thing that's hard to get, the thing that is the Klon of amplifiers or whatever it is.
Well, I also feel like with those types of pedals too, it's the response that you get with that type of pedal, not from people, the response that the pedal has. Because like to recreate that Klon, who was it? I think I saw an article, someone did a review or interview with John Mayer or something. They asked him about some of these stuff, and he says it was about like the Kemper stuff, because he posted like a photo of him using a practice one, and he's like, the response, how it responds when I dig in isn't the same as if I'm using my amp or whatever, and it can be kind of the same with those Klon pedals. Is like yes, Bill Finnegan, did he do a video with 3 big box Klons and a KTR and switch them all between? And like they all sound identical because he was running through some kind of switcher, but like the response that pedal was getting from the guitar and stuff, like it significantly sounds different than like the Klon on like a digital like platform pedal. Like the Klon from a Tone X1 or something is going to be significantly different. So I think in that aspect of it, I think, yeah, I don't think there's going to be any. I think people at this point are just kind of like, not overwhelmed, but I guess kind of overwhelmed because there's just so like another Klon. Like I have a friend who has a new company. He released like his first pedal, and I was like, oh, what is it based off of? And he goes, oh, it's a Klon. And I was like, all right, welcome to the club. Like everyone has done it, and his next pedal is a fuzz. And it's like, okay, well, welcome. Like I think that kind of stuff so organically happened to King of Tone. And like, what's the wait on the King of Tone? 3-4 years, something like that. Like I
think it's longer now.
Like I have clients from when I started that have like, oh yeah, I finally got my second Klon, and it's been like 6 or 7 years, and half the time they forget that they're on a wait list. Like it just takes so long, but. Yeah, I agree. I don't think there is going to be something like that. Especially, I don't think you can create something like that digitally. That's going to be like absolutely like mind-boggling. But
well, I know you can create something that's good. I just don't think that there's going to be. I don't think there's going to be the same mystique around like because there isn't any scarcity either when you're talking about a lot of this like digital stuff, or you're talking about plugins and things like that. Like.
Well, you need to have the right diodes. If I've learned anything, it's all about the diodes.
Right.
So we need a digital pedal, diodes. But it has the secret diodes. You know? Or just goop the DSP chip.
Gosh.
I want to continue talking about some other points that Eric makes. But before we do, I want to turn it over to Grant to talk about a few sponsors that help make sure that the show comes out every single week for the good people out there.
And I, in turn, am going to tag Brian. It's just a merry-go-round of whose sponsor turn is it anyways.
High fives.
That's right. Sorry.
High fives. No, well, the first are going to be the guys over at the Guitar Sanctuary. As we're talking about a lot of these pedals, you know, they do carry a lot of guitars and amps and acoustics and effects pedals, analog, digital, Neural DSP. They have it all covered. New amps that have been released. I think Fender like just dropped a new amp that a couple of people had asked about. I can't remember who it was, but they have it. Go check them out at guitarsanctuary.com. Give them a call, shoot them a text message from that number, and they would be happy to help you out. So go let them know that the chairman sent you, and you won't be disappointed. Next are going to be the guys over at Neural DSP. As we're talking about plugins and stuff too, they have plugins. They have multi-effect units. I have, as well as the Chairmen, we have quad cortexes and nano cortexes, and we have plugins. They have everything that you need to get you going, traveling, you know, silently practicing, live gigging, whatever you need to do, they can get you covered. And while you're at it, why not use their discount code Chairman for 30% off all of their plugins that are 90 days old. So if you try to use the plugin and it doesn't work, it's likely it's not past 90 days. But I think we are safe to say that we are past 90 days for all their plugins.
All their current plugins.
All their current plugins. 90 days. Yeah, they haven't released anything else. And if you have a quad cortex, slowly, all these releases, they have been updating the QC to allow plugins from their desktop version to be onto the quad cortex. So I think we're up to four or five right now. But if you save 30% off, get those plugins. Eventually, you can load it on your quad. So check them out, neuraldsp.com. Use the code Chairman. That will let them know that the Chairman sent you. I'll throw it back to you, Mason.
Very cool. Very cool. Oh, and Grant, we have one that only Grant can tell us about because he's a Canadian.
Well, I can tell you about both mine right now if you like. The first one, we're just going to get these ad breaks all in one go. So get your pens ready because there are coupon codes here. Brian's was Chairman for Neural. BTPA is the one I'm going to start with. Bestronix. Everyone knows about our, some might even confuse it as a love affair for Brad at Bestronix, but I assure you it's just platonic. We're great friends with Brad, and it's because he supplies us with great gear to finish off our pedal board builds. I always harp on about the D-socket connectors that he has that I can't find anywhere else. USB throughs, locking jacks, power throughs, all sorts of stuff. They really help me out there. But even if you need bulk cable, connectors, looms, if you want to get a rack set up, they are incredible, especially at neural DSP and redundant and IEM rack setups. They just do it all. So talk to Brad at btpa.com. And yes, there's a code, DACHAIRS, DACHAIRS, for 10% off your order at btpa.com.
Now, let me ask you, Brad, are you the only... let me ask you a quick question about Brad.
Please.
Are you also... I exchange photos with Brad of strippers.
Oh.
And Brad is a 20 gauge wire stripper guy, but I have to say I'm more of a 60 gauge wire stripper guy. And so, just for those people that are out there, it's important to have strippers at every gauge. Just wanted to throw that out there. If you're into the whole stripper thing, you could be 24 gauge. Usually in guitar world, you don't really get much above 24 gauge. You got
26 for the center of Mogami 2314 and 19. You can use a 26 there if you want.
26 there, okay.
If you're feeling crazy. I feel a little bit jealous because my relationship with Brad has not entered that phase yet.
Okay.
I might test the waters and see how he responds.
Right. Well, strippers are extremely important when you're making cables.
And Brad might sell you a stripper as well at BTPA.
He does. He has those really good ones like Brian has where you
catapult.
You just squeeze it and it does all the work for you. You don't even have to have the fine touch to strip the outer insulator.
Brian told me about those, and I've been making cables for 15 years at that point. And then I see him post something on Instagram like, you just saved me 30 seconds of cable.
Yeah,
hours a year. Does that do every gauge, Brian?
The important
What's the range?
If I can read it, hold on. Yeah, when we all met up. Yeah, so it's 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18.
You can do a 5 mil cable jacket and center core, 4 mil jacket and center core, and you can do everything you need for a pedal board for the common cable types. Let's say that.
Yeah, it cuts copper too. Yeah, when we were all met together for last year and you pulled out a knife, I was like, you're dancing. You're tipping on the...
I've never had a serious injury, I'll say that, but the catapult is much quicker. Yeah, exactly. Where'd my fingers go? So that's probably the longest ad break we've ever had for Besttronics, and maybe the best.
Yeah, so maybe the best one. Yeah.
Ask Brad about the catapult with a K, catapult wire stripper. It will save you a ton of time. And among everything else you need to finish your board. And lastly, for the Canadians, all my fellow syrup suckers, we have a new music store sponsor for you guys to consider in Red Deer, Alberta. So put on your flannels, head out into the cold, check out GB Music and Sound. And you're not going to be disappointed with their selection. Just check out their photo on their website of their pedal wall, or I should say walls plural. And you are going to be gobsmacked by the selection they have. It's incredible. I haven't been there yet in person, but I kind of just drool over the photos whenever Greg posts them. And for our Canadians, check out GB Music and Sound. He's got studio gear, obviously tons of guitar gear, lots of pedals, instruments, amps. Definitely worth checking it out if you're in the Red Deer area, but he does a great online service as well. GB Music and Sound. And by using the link in the description below, you help support Chairman of the Boards. Go there regardless, however you see fit. By using the link, though, you help us keep these episodes coming. So check that out via the link. And even if you just want to see the photos, just go stop by and say hey and tell them the Chairman sent you over there. And that's it. So Mason, I'll throw it back to you. We are now done with our sponsor breaks for the episode.
Yeah.
I will say I just Googled the photo. It is worth the search. That's for sure.
What's that?
The
GB Music and Sound. You should bring it up on screen.
Ooh.
It's so cool.
Let me see if I can share it.
Let me. There you go.
It's worth it if I can find it.
It's worth the view. If you're on YouTube, this is what we're looking at here.
Ooh.
A little warning sign there. Okay.
This guy?
Yeah.
Look at that.
I know he's got Duesenberg. He's got Fender. There's Jackson, Supro.
about to talk about that, Jackson.
And he sent me, I just actually got something from him. He sent me a bag of coffee because he also has a cafe, and the coffee was good.
Wow.
I was very impressed. Yeah.
Look at that.
Beautiful.
So he'll hit all of your addictions, music and caffeine.
Right.
Yeah.
So getting back to this video, one of the things that he mentions as one of the challenges that may explain sort of the decline of guitar pedals is regulations. And he talks about ROHS, which you often will see on when you buy new pedals, especially from larger brands like Dunlop, MXR, Boss. It'll say ROHS compliant and then have like a check mark or something by it. And it's like a little sticker decal. And essentially what this means is that the parts and the assembly and the soldering is not using any lead in the solder. And this is in essence been a requirement for decades for export. So if we want to send our products to Europe, we need to be compliant with this. Mm-hmm. And I think it's for a number of reasons, related to sort of environmental factors. I will say, though, however, that if reliability is the X factor, ROHS is not as good as leaded solder. And like, I would never make a guitar cable with it or anything like that. Like we have to use it, because you can't really sell your pedals on any scale if you're not doing it. But I will say that if I didn't have to use it, I wouldn't for the purposes of the pedals. Obviously we've got it dialed in at this point, but it's just way harder to work with, and there's certain parts you can't get, and things like that. And he also mentions some other things related, like there are certain parts now that you cannot export because of the composition of the materials. I don't think it's that consequential. It maybe affects certain modulation devices. Things like Univibes potentially could be kind of on the chopping block for this as far as like exports. But I think it's pretty limited. And I think that still in the world of guitar pedals, I think the best selling things are kind of like the analog overdrive distortion type stuff. And then I think it's like the digital delays and reverbs and maybe some digital modulation. I don't think that the market for sort of obscure analog modulation stuff is on the kind of the highest list of things that are being exported. I'm not sure how much that really explains the decline. And I think at this point, buying ROHS compliant parts or assembling in that fashion, pretty much any contract manufacturer or manufacturing fab house or places that are doing PCB assembly, all of them will be well versed in this practice because it's been a standard for a long time. So I don't think that that's scaring people off. I think the only people that scares off, and would have before the pandemic as well, is just smaller companies that don't want to have to either retool or redesign based on using parts that are ROHS compliant versus not. However, these days, most of the parts are almost all that way. It's hard to find for most parts in terms of passive components, stuff that doesn't already meet that requirement, because in most other industries as well, where electronics are used, it's going to be the same requirements for exportation. And so it's not really that big of a deal. So I don't know that regulations are such a big thing, but he also, I think, wrapped into that the tariffs. And I think that is more consequential, especially as it relates to China, since so much of what we use for pedals and electronics in general is all coming from there. And so I think that, the consequence of tariffs is just that the pedals become more expensive. And when things become more expensive, it usually shrinks the marketplace, at least until people sort of adjust to that. And I think as of now, I think the imposed tax that's being levied is, I think, at 10% on China.
For China,
which could have been worse. I
was
think
surprised.
Could have been worse because it was worse for the Canadians.
Yep.
and
which is on
Mexico.
pause right now. As of this recording, we're currently on pause.
Yeah. So it's pretty expensive, especially if you have things that are coming from Mexico or from Canada. But in China, 10% is not nothing. But I feel like some of the tariffs that had occurred during the first Trump presidency term, I think they were higher, if I recall.
Oh, yeah. And they escalated quickly. They started a bit low, then they got bigger and bigger. Yep.
So I think a lot of people were already a little gun shy from that. And I know a lot of larger companies weren't doing manufacturing in China for that reason, even though certain parts maybe needed to be purchased there. And then they were going to places like Vietnam, which also does a lot of electronics manufacturing, but wouldn't be subject to those same tariffs. I think also subsequently, some people would go to Taiwan. I don't know how that's treated now under this current tariff, but sometimes they'll get collapsed, against the wishes of the Taiwanese to be considered part of the same as the Chinese. Mm-hmm. But that being said, I don't know. I mean, obviously 10% is not nothing. I would predict that companies are going to find workarounds to that. And again, I think that affects the big companies, that affects small companies, and that affects pretty much everything guitar wise, because everything from pots to knobs to, all the pieces that we rely on to make all the different parts of guitars and amplifiers. There's some amount of those that are coming from China.
Even if the company says made and sourced in America, the company they are sourcing from is sourcing from overseas. Because some of the stuff is not manufactured in America. You cannot get it from,
like those
even then
chips.
Yeah, all the tiny passes, chips, and all that, they're all coming from overseas. But
in PCBs too, all coming from overseas. Most of the pots that are used, it may be an American-based company, but that stuff is coming from overseas.
Even raw materials, certain metals and all this.
Absolutely
you might
metals.
Get it made in America,
metals.
But the company needs to source that metal or even
steel
sheets.
And aluminum.
It has to come from overseas for the most part.
Like Hammond, like those enclosures, the Hammond enclosures.
That's all aluminum.
Yeah. So I get all my stuff from Mauser. I don't even know where they get that. I don't know where that
Mauser would source a ton of stuff overseas. Mauser has a headquarters in Hong Kong.
Oh yeah, I know. I got this thing. It was like you can buy this enclosure right now for $30, or you can get it for $4. But it's going to take 6 weeks to get it because it's coming from overseas. And I was like, oh no, the price difference. But yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah. So I don't know that it's, but that affects the whole industry. And I think that that's going to affect most industries. So I don't know if we can isolate it as much to say like, okay, well, that's the number one factor, but I think it's something that's a consideration. Mm-hmm. He also mentions what he called the elephant in the room. Do you guys remember this part?
Yeah. I do.
I don't remember that specific him using that phrase, but I'm sure I'll remember it as soon as you say it.
Do you want to take this
big.
one? Sounds big.
Yeah.
Go ahead. You say it. I'm going back to the description on it again.
I think the elephant in the room is that there's just fewer people playing guitar. People are not as interested in the things that create the inspiration, to have people want to even buy, basically the top of the funnel person that's like trying to learn an instrument. They get inspired. They start chasing gear. They become customers of yours. There's fewer and fewer people that are kind of getting into that top of the funnel that are making their way all the way down to the point where they're becoming a consumer of musical related gear. And I think that that's a concern for everybody, because if there's fewer people playing guitar, there's fewer people to sell to. And then we're sort of all competing for a limited number of customers. And I think that's where he got into the argument of like the biggest brands sort of win the marketing game because they have the most discretionary money to throw at trying to get in front of people. And so the companies with big social media followings, with, big ad campaigns, and the owning of Instagram and Facebook and YouTube for a number of weeks with product launches, those are really effective strategies that brands can use that smaller brands can't do. They can't replicate that, and so they're much more reliant on kind of getting lucky or having a company talk about them or having a YouTube channel talk about them, like that pedal show, and using them, like that's, you know, a great like tool to help promote your brand sort of organically. But, you know, all the steps that it takes to like get it in front of them in the first place, I'm sure is not a simple process.
What he did say though as well, which I loved, and I remember hearing this in around 2021, 22, early-ish into the pandemic, that more and more females are playing guitar. And that might sound, you know, a little, I don't want that to come across the wrong way necessarily, but I mean, typically, even my audience, my metrics on Instagram, and definitely my customer base, it's like 98% male.
Yeah.
So I get really excited at the fact that it's becoming, even if it's marginally more diverse and more people are getting interested in it. And I would be curious to see how that has and will affect product. Mm-hmm. And like, there's some great female guitarists out there, and to see them influence a different demographic, a different gender in this case, it'll be really interesting to see how that affects the industry. And I think only in positive ways. So I mean, who knows what ripple effect that'll have? And I don't want to overgeneralize, but I feel like by and large, females tend to play less video games, and they're on screens on the gamer side of things less than men are, which already they're winning in that regard. And so hopefully they would shift to picking up an instrument and picking up one with 6 strings with pickups in it, and it requires you to buy pedals. I would be very happy with that. But yeah, I'd be curious to see what the next 5 years look like, and, you know, little shifts that are made for product development to suit the changes that are coming.
Yeah. And I think you're seeing a lot more female signature instruments. Like I saw
100%.
Yvette Young has this signature pedal, you know, Laurie Basilio
She's got a few things,
has a few different signature items, and with Laney and Ibanez and or Ibanez, if you know.
Ibanez. Who was, and I can't remember her name. I just saw, she posted something on Instagram the other day. She played the Beat It solo on that Michael Jackson documentary.
Oh, Orianthi.
Yeah. Like she was a huge
Australian
inspiration. Yeah. For a ton of guitar players as well. And so,
she's great. Nina Strauss is another big one. I mean, and then kind of like from the old school, you know, Jennifer Batten, you know, Wendy Melvoin, you know, all legends. But yeah, I mean, I think it's exciting to see that. And I agree, like the metrics, I think for us, like there's like 2 or 3% female viewership on our YouTube channel. You know, and I think a lot of them maybe aren't necessarily even guitar players, maybe just interested in the content that's related to like interviews, you know, like they're fans of the music, and, you know, this is just a way to kind of get access. But I think it's an exciting prospect, you know, that will get, you know, more female guitar players that, you know, I think the more prominent they're made by brands to like put them forward, I think you're going to start to see a lot more younger girls taking up guitar, and that can bring us another guitar hero that that'd be great. I mean, there's so many great guitar players. I mean, like and Wendy Melvoin's probably one of my favorite guitar players generally. Like, man, so many cool parts between Purple Rain and like Sheryl Crow stuff that she did. It's like unbelievably good. And she also played on a bunch of that Seal stuff, which a lot of people don't know.
She's played with everyone.
With everybody. Yeah.
That's awesome.
I to comment on the whole like less people playing, I think there's a few factors into it. I do agree that a lot less people, maybe we've already moved on from the topic, I'm not sure. But
go for it, Brian.
Is that I think it's a time thing for a lot of people nowadays. People are so like, life just kind of seems busy just for everyone. Like I remember there's times like when I worked at the guitar shop and I had coworkers like, hey, we should hang out. And I'm like, well, I have to go home and do this, and this, and that's in the next 3 hours for my kids and my family and do all these things. And I have to do this and do that. And it's like, wow, that's, you know, you got a lot going on. And I'm like, yeah. And amongst all that, I have to figure out a time to practice for wherever I'm playing this weekend or whatever. And I also think it's an oversaturated market of information on some aspects that people get so kind of confused on a lot of this stuff. And I think it's like, if I was stepping into to being a guitarist fresh right now in 2025, I think I would be a little bit afraid because yes, you know, obviously you want to get the big pedal companies, you want the Strymons, but the pricing and stuff is really high. You get so many opinions. And then honestly, if you don't get those pedals, and it sucks because I've met a lot of people that are like this, that like, if you don't get those top pedals that everyone else says you have to get, like they kind of dunk on you or dog on you. I guess not dunk, it's dog on you, I guess.
I've never been dunked on.
I've never been either. I cannot jump. I cannot shoot baskets. Don't ask anyone in Dallas right now anything basketball related. I guess something happened. I don't know. I don't pay attention to basketball. But
did LeBron get another goal?
They traded some dude. I have no idea. I don't.
Luka is now on the Lakers.
Yeah, that's what it was.
You guys got Anthony Davis.
Yeah, I don't. Okay. I'm hockey. Yeah. I'm a hockey guy, so I don't know. But what I'm saying is like, it's like, you know, you go and you get all these cheap pedals or something, and you're just wanting to learn. And people are like, oh yeah, that's like, it's, you know, you just get a lot of random crap. So I think seeing more people playing and stuff would be really cool. I have a lot of female clients, which are cool, and they're great players too. And like, it's like some of this, it's just like, oh hey, why didn't you demo that pedal more? And they send me a video. I'm like, because I can't even play like you. Like they're top notch. But yeah, I think a lot of it now is people are so busy or they just don't know where to start. So having pages like Vertex to talk through methods, Goodwood, talking through, like, Grant, the videos you've been posting have been really informational, even for me, just to watch and listen to it, just hear like how and why that process was done, and seeing all these videos online, giving a reason behind the why it's not just you have to get the timeline. It's you have to get the timeline, but here's why. I think is really helpful and really helps people that are stepping into it or has been playing, but now they're getting into pedals because, as we've said, the market is so crazy. So I think it would be cool to see, you know, maybe a more streamlined, like, informational from people, because yes, you get these big pedal companies who, like, they release trailers for pedals now. Maris.
The Maris stuff is
the Maris
awesome.
Stuff. I mean,
I love it.
Neural came out with a 30-minute video on the Nano Cortex, and then left everyone like, what's the pedal?
And they shoot them like widescreen too. Like some of those Maris ones are shot like a movie.
Oh yeah, it's like did Christopher Nolan do these videos, like Walrus doing one for their rehearsal pedal, coming in through an elevator and going into the room, and you hear him playing and it sounds amazing, and it pans out to him sitting in his living room and it's silent, and you hear bink bink bink, like that's all, like that kind of stuff. Like it's
I overdubbed that.
Oh,
the blink, blink, blink. That was me playing. Yeah.
Right. But it's just like stuff like it seems like, yeah, there's a lot of companies that like, but that's an interesting thing too, is that they're captivating the audience in a different way. It's not, hey, buy this pedal. It's like that hook, line, and sinker in a way. So yeah, no, it's, I expect to see a cinematic video from you, Grant. I'm just kidding. No.
Just lend me $100,000. Right? I'll see what I can come up with.
But yeah, no. So I think there is a thing with some of these big companies, like, yeah, they do have the marketing and stuff, but it's just finding creative ways to make it relatable and also fun to watch. So yeah.
Well, a final thought I have on this, and maybe we'll just go, you know, around the horn here to kind of finish this out. You know, I think that what Eric is saying, I think there is some validity to it, in that, in comparison with how things had been kind of since 2020, we have been seeing a decline in the last few years. I think that even amongst the big companies, I'm sure that the low-hanging fruit at this point doesn't exist in the same way that it did. I think for the brands that are creative, I think for the brands that have the social media presence and know how to reach their customers, they're a little more immune to this sort of stuff. I also think the companies that have been around for a long time have seen these sorts of ebb and flow that have occurred over time and sort of recognize the moment for what it is, and they can say, we've been here before, or we've seen this before.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the other thing is that we haven't had social media and YouTube long enough for there to be versions of these ebbs and flows that have been analyzed and critiqued in the same way. Like all those things 10 years ago, even kind of happened in the darkness because there wasn't this same sort of conversation around in the industry or the analytics of the industry. And now there are all these personalities in our industry that can speak on it. And that's not to say that it's disinteresting, because I think it is interesting. It just wasn't part of the culture that you would have people on YouTube sort of talking about these sort of things. And so maybe in the boardroom, this was a conversation topic like, hey, what the heck are we going to do? We can't recreate these sales that we did from 2 years ago. And I also think we're at the moment in time with our industry where there is a major change happening in the way that people use pedals. I think that the modeling is taking over in a way that it wasn't able to break through in past incarnations, like with the Mind 6 pod and stuff like that. I think you're seeing a really serious ship change in the way that people utilize their guitar devices, and that the technology is such where people are using it. They're not just, experimenting with it. They're actually building their rigs around modeling and simulated amps. And I think that it changes the landscape of pedals when that's the core of the sound. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of the pedals that we used to utilize for creating amp style distortions and stuff like that, now we actually have digital versions of those amps. Yeah. And so like overdrive pedals, the types that you need maybe aren't as amp-like anymore, because you have sort of the most amp-like digital recreations possible. And so you're seeing sort of different pedal choices. Mm-hmm. One thing that I think is really great for guys like Grant and I is that we make a lot of accessories which sort of serve multiple masters. Like you could be a modeling guy and our buffers and interfaces are still going to be great for you. They're still going to work great for you. Or if you're running DI, you have things like the long line. Or, if you need an audition loop, you still need to have this interface that does that, So there's these elements to accessories, which I think are great in that it actually sort of makes those even more necessary now that you've got some of these pieces and you're not going in the traditional amplifier route. And then I think that there's some things on the pedal side which become much less attractive, because you can fit 3 or 4 amp modelers or have one, simulator that does multiple amps in this small compact enclosure. And so I think what you're just seeing is the desires of the industry are morphing, and pedals haven't kept up. And even as Eric says, like there's a ceiling on what guitar players are willing to accept as far as like the types of devices that are out there, because the sounds that we're going for by and large are from the 60s and 70s and maybe into the 80s. And the technology's evolved greatly since then, but companies that stray too far from that generally end up punished, because the imagination of the guitar player out there is not yet at that level, or they haven't seen examples of music that they want to recreate that isn't still using this older technology. Mm-hmm. And so this is kind of, I think, the place that we're in as a consequence of that. But I'd love to hear kind of final thoughts from the two of you before we wrap up.
Brian?
Yeah. Trying to gather. I think, I think there's a lot of things to kind of, that can factor, pros and cons of the industry and where we're going. And, it's you can always look back on the things that were released, like they said, the Klon and the Timmy and the King of Tone, all this kind of stuff that's been released. I don't think looking ahead at like the technology of what's coming like is a bad thing. I think there's a lot of great companies out there, and it's having an open mind to a lot of this gear that really just like allows their creativity. Like never, I would, I just had a phone call with a client where he was like, yeah, everyone gives me crap about because I have these pedals. And I'm like, well, it's your sound. It's your thing. Like if you enjoy it and you're happy with it and those pedals work, if it's some random pedal that no one's ever heard and it sounds great to you and you love what it does, that's fantastic. For some reason, I had over 2 million people love this fart pedal that I posted on a stupid video that I did on social media a couple weeks ago, and people are like, "Oh, that's so that hilarious."
Was you. It was. And did you model your own? Or
no. It came pre gassed up,
preloaded.
Preloaded. Yeah. It came preloaded.
Who is the creator of those impulse responses?
That would be probably Mr. Fart Pedal himself.
Who makes the fart pedal?
Let me see.
Mr. Sweet Cheeks.
I wonder if is there like a prominent company that's behind it that's just kind of going anonymous here?
I mean, they were at NAMM, so I mean, they had this version, but the newer version, I guess when you move, so like if you would have sent any note through it right now, it does nothing. It just makes the noise, but on their newer version, it actually the fart changes with the pitch of where it is on the guitar, so it can be like a deep fart or a high fart, which is really funny.
Can you go 100% wet?
Yeah, so it has a wet and a dry setting on this one, which is perfect. I would say the wet sounds more like a disgusting synth that you got off of like Craigslist from a guy in a back alley, but it's one of those things. So, but it's just like stuff like that. It's something so stupid, but I always say like if it's fun and you enjoy it, I'm like get the pedal. I think the tariffs. There's so much logistics side of things could go up in price. That's why I always encourage you could buy stuff pre-owned or you can find like I live on Facebook Marketplace for a lot of this stuff. So I think we could see a turn of some of these products. I just think it'd be nice not to get 9 pedal releases in 1 week from all these companies because it's like seconds after it's posted. Did you see this pedal? I'm like, same as you, Joe. Same as you, Bob. Like it's like there's so many releases, and then half the time they end up being the same pedal. So, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see the rest of the year because we're only in February. What's going to come out? I didn't go to NAMM, but there was a lot of stuff at NAMM that people were talking about. So it'll be interesting to see where this all goes. But I think, like I said, his video, I think it was really on point for some stuff. And, obviously I gave my input for the others, but a really well-rounded video. And that's what I would say. What about you, Grant?
I mean, on the price thing, no manufacturer, that I know of, at least in smaller companies, looks forward to raising their prices. I was looking at some of our price things, even on the interfacer. I don't think we've raised the price in the interfacer for 7 or 8 years. And I was, oh wow, I thought I'd raise it. It just haven't happened. Nice. We've been able to keep the price the same as quantity goes up. And so I really hope prices don't have to go up for everybody. But if the industry is shrinking, let's say that's true longer term, and tariffs come into place and prices go up for raw materials, there's no other option. It's go out of business or it's raise your prices. And so we'll see what happens there. If 10% from China on raw materials is where it stays for a while, I don't think everyone will have to raise their prices necessarily, or at least not by much. So that's a good thing. But I personally think out of this whole conversation, I feel like this is a response to the pandemic, and that things will swing back the way that they came and maybe settle a bit to what we were seeing pre-pandemic, which I think it's getting, at least for me. I don't know if you would agree, Mason, or Brian, even with setups, but I feel like things are slowly getting back to where they were pre-pandemic. I'm not feeling the same pinch I was 8 months ago, last year, where things really slowed down. So I'm hoping people feel less strain on their budgets for more reasons than just guitar pedals, causing less stress and being able to enjoy their time a little bit more and all that. But the good thing for us, as people feel less stress on their budgets, we feel less stress in our businesses. And so I hope it evens out for everybody. But I feel and I hope that it's just a bit of a rebalancing of the industry. And I think at the end of the day, the market speaks and they tell you what they want. And hopefully we'll see a little bit less of the stuff that is flash in the pan and a little bit more of the stuff that is longer lasting and more sustainable moving forward. So time will tell. We don't have a all-seeing eye or whatever it is, a glass ball to tell us the future.
We have one of those 8 balls that you can shake and it'll tell you.
I've found those are quite accurate over time. Made a lot of big life decisions.
Same.
Based on that 8 ball. Here's to marrying my wife. Love you, baby.
Yeah.
That one worked out very well. So no, I think, well, it'd be interesting to have another conversation like this in a year or two.
Yeah.
And see, it's like, it's actually been a well-balanced year or two. I hope that's the case. I'm not looking for huge fluctuations like that in my life that are unpredictable in either way.
Right.
Some predictability in this stuff is always appreciated.
Yeah. Well, guys, it's great as always to speak with you. And for all the listeners out there, we're so grateful to have you and be on board with what it is that we're doing. Just again, to reiterate, we have a new Facebook page that is it's a group that you can join. You can ask us about tech tips, issues that you're having with your rig. It's a really cool community. It's already been growing significantly since we started it a few weeks ago. So we'd love to have you. And if you would be willing to write us a review on any of the podcast locations that you might be listening, the Spotify's, the Apple, wherever it is that you find us, we'd love a review. An honest review is all we ask. It's really helpful to help other people find it is what we're doing. We're still number 1 in Bangladesh. So shout out to all those in Bangladesh who are listening or have their IPs rerouted through there. And we'll see you guys all next week.
Hey guys.